Hey everyone, welcome back to the Rollout. I'm Linsay Rousseau.
And I'm Genevieve Marie. Hello and welcome.
Sort of a post-mortem on Moon Knight.
A post-mortem it is.
That is what we are going to do today.
Moon Knight was very interesting. It started off so slow and then it felt like a train that just picked up speed as it went downhill without the brakes on. And it wasn't necessarily in a good way either. It started off, for me personally, this is my opinion, it started off in a very murky, sort of slow paced way, and not in a way that was very engaging. And then it got more and more interesting with more elements. Like a lot of people are comparing it to The Mummy or like National Treasure or like Uncharted, the video games, not the movie. And it got really like action adventure-y by the end.
But it took like 4 episodes to get us there. Like we had to get through, and I don't want to say a slog. Like it was watchable. It was watchable. It just was kind of all over the place.
I do want to also start out saying I did not hate this show.
No,
I didn't love it. I didn't even like really like it per se. I think it just sits in a nice like average space for me, where it was not even a disappointment because I didn't even know what to expect anyway. Right off the bat, I don't know, you can give your percentage score for it, but for me, I would say like it landed somewhere between like a 65% on my radar.
I can agree with that. And one thing I would say, and I've seen other people say this who've been reviewing the show, were it not for the stellar performances from the cast, I think the show, I wouldn't have gotten past the first episode. But I'll be damned, the cast made the best with what they had. And I have no faults in any of their performances. Yes, people have been laughing about Oscar Isaac's accent, but as we know, his character is not a Brit. This was his persona that put on a British accent. That was his idea of what that would be. So, I will say
context for it too.
Yeah, I will say the acting is what really saved this show from being just completely forgettable.
Yes, I would have to agree with you there. And back on the accent thing, like, it's goofy and it's weird. However, at least the script tells you why he has it.
Right.
Like it's built into the script. It's built into the story that he has it because he's putting on the persona. Spoiler alert. He's putting on the persona of his childhood hero from a movie that he really liked watching. Right. And it makes sense in that way. Is that like a great choice? I don't know. I really was kind of just along for the ride for this one. Yeah. When I heard that one of the main writers wrote the live action Death Note, that rose like so many red flags just popped up when I heard that. So my expectations, I guess if you were to look at it on a graph, we're just sitting at 0. And you can either go up, like have an upward trend, or you can do a downward trend from there. Right. I really wasn't either way on it.
Yeah. I mean, it's like we're balancing the scales, like in the show, right? So it's like the scales kind of went, they're not quite level, but they're not like this.
We were trying. So let's start at the beginning.
There's a lot to unpack here.
There's so much to unpack. And the best way to start, I believe, is just from episode 1 and then going all the way up to episode 6. Yeah. Because honestly, it kind of feels like there was 2 different shows that they were trying to make. And they kind of failed at succeeding at both. Yeah. The first one being like the psychological thriller mystery You know, who am I? Who is Stephen Grant? Why is he doing the things he's doing? But anybody who knows anything about Moon Knight knows that he does have the split personality. So that's not exactly surprising. They weren't really quiet about that fact in the advertising.
Oh, not at all. And they were, I mean, people were giving interviews about it, and, you know.
Exactly, because that's the thing that they really wanted to laud Oscar Isaacs for, is his character work in this. So they were naturally going to showcase that in the interviews and, you know, have that be one of the big selling points. However, in episode 1, it's very frustrating. Episode 1 and episode 2 are very frustrating to me because it feels a little bit cheap, the way that they do the losing of time and the mind gimmicks, because it cuts around all of the important and exciting action in favor of trying to get across the fact that that Stephen Grant is losing time. He doesn't know what's happening, which I feel there are other ways in which you can do that without cutting out all the action pieces. One of the big problems that I had, I believe it's the car chase is in episode 1. Yeah. It's either, is it 2?
Is it 1 or 2?
I think it kind of straddles both. I think it's actually episode 2. And the problem that I had with that is that I kept cutting away from the action, the thing that would actually visually engage me as an audience member. I mean, let's remember that we are watching a TV show, which the medium is visual. It's, you know.
And it's also for a superhero show. So there, you know, and again,
it's right on the 10, you know.
They were leaking video of Oscar Isaac training for this 2 years ago. So when they had the scene, the fight in the bathroom when he's being chased by the jackals, like the bathroom fight, I think frustrated me the most, because it's literally like we come out to the hallway and you hear it, and I'm just like,
and you don't see it.
What?
Right. I think it would be much more impactful to see and establish how skilled Mark Spector is by showing us how skilled he was, and then having some other way, another visual cue, rather than just cutting away from the action, in order to show us that Oscar Isaacs is going from Stephen Grant and then turning into Mark.
Which they did. Well, we're jumping ahead here, but which they finally figured out how to do by episode 6. But yeah, it might be, you know, and like you said, it's not like they were keeping that a secret. So I could understand them making that choice if this was supposed to be a big reveal. But even if the audience has never read the Moon Knight comics, just if they've been following social media or the news at all, none of this is a surprise.
I honestly think that this was just an artistic choice that really didn't pan out for them. It could also be a budget choice as well. I have very much speculated that they were cutting corners on a lot of things in this show in particular, so that they could have their large 2-episode finale in which they bring out all of the big guns with the CGI and the monster fights and all, you know. But because of the fact that they can cut around the action in the first couple of episodes, they don't have to pay an entire second unit and stunt unit. And I mean, like, they have to pay them because there were stunts, but like a minuscule amount, because there wasn't that many fights they had to choreograph. There wasn't like any big set pieces that they had to wrangle, because of the fact that most of that car chase scene, that's on green screen. They don't have to put a lot of money into it. You know, like, you don't have these big set pieces and you know, statement fights that you have to choreograph. It's not John Wick. And they just saved all of that budget until the very end, where you have the monster fight and the pyramids and this, that, the other thing, the superhero fights. Another thing that kind of bothered me was how inactive and how actually, no, Stephen Grant isn't just inactive. He is actively fighting against trying to figure out what's going on.
Yeah.
And that to me is incredibly unengaging, especially at the beginning, because you already see that he chains himself to the bed. He puts the sand around the bed. He knows something is going on. He knows something is up, that he has these.
He's missing days. He's,
lapses of time. He's got like all this weird stuff that's happening around him. And yet he wants to, and like this could be a very real life reaction to just cut that off and ignore it. But for a character in a TV show, what is more engaging for your main character is to actually interact with the things that are happening around you and interact with the world that seems strange to you. So like for him, it should have been more like a mystery of what's going on. Why am I the way I am? Let me dig into it, because Stephen Grant doesn't have any idea that Mark Spector is a thing. Mark Spector doesn't want to think about Stephen Grant, doesn't want to acknowledge Stephen Grant's existence. However, Stephen Grant has no idea Mark Spector exists. So there's no reason for his character not to want to figure out what's going on.
Yeah, exactly.
So that inactivity and that almost willful ignorance, that willful not wanting to engage in his world was extremely frustrating to me. And especially when Stephen Grant and Mark were interacting in the first 3 episodes, where they just kept on continually pushing each other away, but to the point where it was almost like, and that's fine.
Yeah.
As long as there's a little bit of pull towards each other as well. It was also kind of lacking that pull back towards each other. Like, I still need you. Like, I don't like you. I don't like what you're doing to my life, but I still need you in my life to help me along in the greater course of the narrative.
Yes, exactly. This goes on for a while before we get to Stephen being made aware of Mark Spector. You know, we get that so moving along the timeline, we get that in episode 2. He obviously has a very hard time coming to grips with this, as well as meeting Mark's wife, Layla, who quite frankly was a highlight of the show for me. I absolutely loved her. I felt she was horribly underutilized until episode 6. And that was one of the complaints I had about her, is like, I was instantly engaged with her and her story, and I just felt like they could have used her a little better.
Okay, for me, I loved this character. I thought she was great. I honestly didn't think the build was, I don't think she was actually underutilized. Like, my personal opinion, I thought that she was used just enough in order to have her own hero's journey. I thought that was great without, because I mean, you could make it very messy by having like A, B, and C storylines with, I mean, you already have Stephen Grant, you already have Mark, and just kind of diving off into the direction of Lila. She's operating in the background, but in a very good way. And it's always been engaged in the story instead of just kind of like standing off to the side and doing nothing. And you definitely see that the actress who plays her, she put the work in as far as doing the stunts and the fights. I mean, I don't want to badmouth Oscar Isaac's work, but his fight performances were very lacking for me. Like, I'm not saying he didn't put in the work and he didn't try. I'm saying that from what I have seen, I just don't think that that is something that he excels in. Like, I agree that like it's awesome and he should definitely be applauded for putting in the work. But at the same time, there were instances where I was kind of praying for a stunt double, because there were certain moves and stuff that were kind of stiff, and you could just tell that like he still isn't at the level to where like Keanu Reeves is. But Keanu Reeves has been studying martial arts ever since
The Matrix. Yeah, exactly.
So, you know, you can only demand so much of your actors. And again, Oscar Isaacs is very talented at what he does. He's a very talented character actor. And you just got to accept that sometimes you're not going to excel in all areas of, you know, physicality and physical acting. But Lila, she was amazing. She
Oh,
did so good. Like
absolutely.
all of her stunt work, all of her fight choreography. Um,
Yeah.
Everybody had stunt doubles. And, you know, that's not to put down or like
No.
obscure any of those actors' performances. But you could tell because she also didn't have a mask on for
Yes.
all of her work. So
Yeah.
like the interchanging of the, you know, of her double had to be a little bit more precious.
Right. Exactly.
And you could definitely tell she had the physicality. She really did it. And she sold herself to me very well as being a superhero.
Yeah,
You know,
absolutely.
perfect. And I loved her little arc. It was nice.
Really do.
It wasn't
And I
distracting.
honestly, since they've already said there are no plans for a season 2, I would love to see her spinoff show. So just throwing that out there, Disney Plus, you're doing all the other things. Let's give us our first Egyptian superhero. I mean,
yeah, she was really good and she was engaging. And you know, I was very pleased to see where they went with her character because it wasn't just like, hey, look at me, like they have been doing with, you know, with a lot of their female superheroes so far. Like you, like with Black Widow and with Captain Marvel, you have that like lean in girls, like sort of feel and vibe to things. And it's just like, okay, like I can tell that this is trying to pander to me. With Lila, I didn't feel like the studio was trying to pander to me. I think they just made a good character.
yeah.
So we already did episode 1,
1 and 2. So moving on to episode 3.
Episode 3.
We discover Amit's tomb. And this is when we go to Cairo. So, you know, a lot of talk has been made about the fact that we had a Middle Eastern director or showrunner running this show, and they were taking great care in trying to maintain the authenticity of the fact that this is a show that deals with Egypt, with the Egyptian gods. And now we finally get to Cairo and get to see just how much, and I will say they did their due diligence when it came to this you know, this element of the story.
Yeah, so the Egyptian mythology aside, because they kind of had to like fool around with it quite a lot in order to get the story that they wanted. All things considered, Ahmet is actually more of like a beast rather than a god. I mean, like the character, the creature that eats the hearts is more of like this weird sort of hybrid beast. But that aside, it doesn't matter.
For storytelling purposes,
the one thing that I really did like was the fact, and it's small, but it's big in a way because geographically it forms our understanding of of the scenery and the city. But like they showed the fact that the pyramids butt right up against the city of Cairo. They're like right there. And a lot of the times in movies, you'll get the shots of the pyramids and either they will use a lens that makes it seem like Cairo is like really, really, really far away, or they'll shoot on the other side into the desert and be like, they're so like, they're just out in the middle of the desert.
We're near each other.
They're right there. They're right there. They're right next door. All you have to do, you know, it's not that far away. Yeah, so that was nice that they actually like put a realistic perspective on Cairo and the city and the layout and, you know, the whole thing. I did enjoy the fact that we do kind of get a nice little adventure film in that respect as well, because not only are you going to different locales, which you don't really get a lot of that in Marvel films. You don't get Marvel films. You go to different locations, but they don't exactly like, they don't highlight the fact that like, oh, it's an adventure and we're like, you know, we're here and we're doing a thing like Captain America and the Winter Soldier. I believe they go to Geneva and they're just like, yeah, we're just in Geneva and we're gonna have this like it doesn't matter, we're gonna have an establishing shot and then go right into like a building.
And this is where the fact that Stephen and Layla are both, either, I don't know if they ever established, archaeologists, history buffs, whatever. This is where we get the Indiana Jones element, the national treasure element, where you have protagonists who are, viscerally interested in the area in which they are. And so because of that, it makes sense to the character end of the story to highlight the area and not just make it something they're blowing through literally or blowing up. So we really did get to dive into the city of Cairo a little bit.
Yeah, the tonal shift, now that you're mentioning it, this is where the tone shifts and the genre actually shifts.
Yeah.
And it is like night and day, to be honest. And we haven't even gotten into, I think something very important to mention right now, because I just thought of it. We haven't said one thing about Ethan Hawke.
No.
Or his character. And that's because it was so lackluster. Like, bless Ethan Hawke. He's a good actor.
He's a great actor.
Don't get me wrong.
No.
His character, however, was dull and so uninspired dull. And just like so many other Marvel villains that we've seen before. You would think, I mean, he was our first quote unquote cult leader.
Yeah.
In the very beginning, you had the thing where he put like the glass in his sandals. That never came back up. That was, and you would think that like, oh, they're showing the fact that he is very dedicated, to his cult leader craft.
Right. We see him balancing the scales, literally taking life from people.
Right. And like with the glass and the sandals, you're like, okay, this guy is, he's pretty hardcore. He's very dedicated. He, is very disciplined. And yet none of that really came back around to really define his character. No. I didn't see him being like super disciplined a lot of the time. Like he just kind of is like, yes, I'm doing my leadership thing, this, not the other thing. But you don't see him like do any other trials, any other physical trials like the glass and the shoes that you see. Well,
and the other
kind of bolster that idea, or to prove to us that yes, this guy is a tough nut to crack.
Well, and to that point, he was the former Avatar.
Also, yes.
Which means he would have been a badass fighter in his day. And yes, he's got the cane and everything, but I'm like, Yoda had a cane too, and we saw him kick ass with it. So I'm like, nothing, he just talked a lot about the fact that he used to be an Avatar. I'm like, I saw nothing in this character that made me even think that there was a past of violence. And it's like, yeah, he was kind of devious and everything, but I'm like, this man used to be a killer for years, and like I didn't see any of that.
And I mean, his relationship with Khonshu actually is more like more like two dudes like reuniting at a high school reunion, and it's just like, yeah, this guy used to beat me up, but look at me now, I don't need you. It was so low stakes feeling that it almost doesn't seem like their time together was meaningful to either of them. It was just like oh yeah, we were together for a time, but it doesn't really matter now. And it's just like, that should matter. That should be like one of your the most interesting part about your character.
Well, also, how did he stop being an Avatar? Yeah, because I was like, well, how did he stop being the Avatar? Like that was probably a really interesting story, because as we see with the relationship with Mark, Steven, and Khonshu, you can't just give it up. So
it brings into question so many things. And they did have opportunities to make that character more interesting. I just don't think that either they didn't have the time or they didn't really care to, because it didn't service the greater narrative. It would have just added to the story, which I would argue is very important. But a lot of the times people just want to race to the end and have, have the big boss fight at the end. And as long as you get to that and it's good,
yeah,
nothing else will, nobody's going to like see the holes in the plot, or they're not
right.
really going to be focusing on the flaws. However, we did get the big explosive ending, and I'm still focusing on the plot holes. And
Yeah.
that's because the big explosive ending was also kind of murky, not as unengaging as the beginning, but still just kind of like, I don't know. It's okay. Arguably, episode 5 is the most interesting and engaging out of everything, out of everything that we got. Episode 5 is actually a great little one shot.
Yeah.
And I would just be like, yeah, just check out episode 5 and then maybe 6 if you want to like a wrap up on this thing.
Yes.
And that's all. You don't have to watch the rest of it.
Yeah.
The rest of it is just getting to these 2 episodes.
Yes, because we get a hippopotamus god and we start to learn about like, are they dead? Are they not dead? Is the psychiatric hospital reality? Is Egypt reality? We learn about the balancing of the scales of their hearts.
Right. Backstory.
Yeah, exactly.
I was really shocked that Disney actually okay, so the rating that this has is one score. It's TV 14.
Right.
The highest rating that you can give something is TV 17, I believe.
Which is, rated R.
Yeah, which is for television.
Oh, for television. Yeah.
So it's not rated R.
Right.
That's just for TV.
Yeah.
And so like for a TV 14 rating, I was very surprised that they got away with the child abuse.
Yes. I mean,
for that.
They didn't show a lot
of
it, but yes, that was a very devastating story.
Yeah, but the implications, well, you had child death, first of all, and then you had the consequences of that being thrust onto another innocent child who then was abused for the majority of his life, the majority of his young life. And even though they didn't like show anything happen, the way that they shot it and all of that is like you might as well have shown it, like it's almost like in a horror movie where you don't show the monster, but like the monster is there, and that's the scary part.
Right.
They did that with this. Like, I obviously did not want to see any of that.
No, not at all. And I was another thing that I really would have loved to have seen more of was his relationship with his father, because you can tell the dad really cares for him. But then it's like, why was the dad excusing the mom's behavior this whole time? And, when we see Oscar Isaac's amazingly brilliant breakdown at the funeral, which, by the way, answered the question whether or not he was Jewish, which a lot of fans were worried about. They answered it in a very tactful way. I was pretty happy with that. But it's man, that, to be able to excuse that level of abuse.
Right. Like it was rough. They had one episode to do it. And granted, it wasn't the entire episode focused on that either, because you're bouncing back and forth between the asylum and then the backstory, and then like the having to weigh the hearts and all of that stuff. Like, I mean, this one was probably the best written out of all of them, the best directed and shot. You had a very interesting shot or concept of Mark, the child Mark, going up the stairs in his family's home, and then like the memory would it would do a time skip in the memory, and then he'd go up the same stairs, but it looked like it was like a spiraling staircase almost that he was running up, because he was just doing it over and over again in the time lapse. And that was very clever. I thought that was a wonderful way to show the passage of time, which then you have that lovely like little piece and that lovely set piece as well, as the camera is panning up and you just keep seeing him running up the stairs. And then you have the piece of shit murky crap in episode 1 and 2 with the loss of time. It's like, okay, so you guys know how to deal with this. You know how to deal with it, but not every time. I don't understand. Like you handled it so well in one episode, but over the course of the first 2 episodes, somehow the ball was dropped. I don't know if they had different people working on each.
Well, I mean, they had some different directors for, they have 3 directors credited, 1 director for 4 episodes and then 2 other directors for 3 episodes. So yeah, obviously
that's that. But like, yeah, the last 2 episodes, I mean, I wouldn't say episode 6 was, it wasn't like groundbreaking or
it was a Marvel
wonderful.
Action, but it was what you expected from a Marvel action movie, It
was a nice wind down, I guess, from episode 5.
Well, what I really loved, because so episode 5, we end with Mark being left in the desert and, turning to stone. And then in episode 6, we pick up and we see Steven choosing to give everything up to go save Mark. And, basically they are able to balance the scales because he is able to reconcile these different parts of himself and come to, I guess, find some semblance of peace. And that is what allowed the scales to balance. And this is where you get Mr. Knight and Moon Knight. And then they, Oscar's performance in episode 6 with going back and forth and was really engaging. And so I really did appreciate that, storyline where, and this, because we've talked about this in previous episodes about how Hollywood handles representation of mental illnesses. And this was an instance where I was really happy that they didn't stigmatize it. They didn't display it as being a disability. They weren't criticizing it. And the fact that by the end of the series, they have that line that you were always my superpower.
Right.
I just thought was really, as someone who's dealt with mental illness for my whole life, like that was just really empowering to me, that the message was love yourself, be comfortable with yourself. What some see as a disability is actually a superpower. And so that for me was a really impactful moment.
But yeah, other than that,
so that was, that
was Moon Knight. That was my thoughts on it.
So will we see them again? We don't know. It's Marvel. Never shut the door. Never say never. I think the show had potential. It did some things right. It did some things not so right. I promised I'd stop saying this, but it wasn't the Book of Boba Fett. So, there's that.
Right.
This is how I balance the scales. Book of Boba Fett, Mandalorian. So, those are our thoughts. Let us know your thoughts in the comments, of course.
Yeah. So shall we do the sign off?
Let's do the sign off. Okay. Right. We got this. Khonshu be with me.
Do we?
I don't know.
This has been the rollout.
And we will geek with you
next week. And we did it.
We did it. Awesome, guys. Yes, we will be back to our regularly scheduled time on Friday at noon Pacific. Thank you so much for joining us.
Yes. Cut the feed.